Hi there. Welcome to the Sober Circle channel. Enjoy this speaker tape.
Thank you. My name is Lou Fenimore, and I'm a recovered alcoholic. Through the grace of God and the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous and rooms such as this, I've not found it necessary to take a drink or any other mood-altering stimulant since November the 16th of 1963. Yes, I do have a copy of this book here. I believe one day it'll catch on in our fellowship. They're for sale in the firewall, and it contains a lot of vital information that we are totally unfamiliar with, and it's called Reality. I was an impulsive, compulsive, repulsive drunk, and look up them words and they'll explain a great deal. And if you ever look up the meaning of the word grace in the grace of God, it says an unearned favor. So I never earned what I got today. I think one of the things that sometimes we don't realize is you don't have to wish anything bad on a drunk. He can get in more goddamn trouble in 20 minutes than you can get him out of in 20 years. And it says that we were maladjusted to life, and I want to tell you they were talking about me. There's some things in here that's important, I think, in this book. But when we talk about how maladjusted to life the drunk was, I like to think of a story. It's not mine, it's an old friend of mine. And it tells about how much trouble a drunk can get himself into. And it tells, the story goes that in the Depression days in the Deep South, there used to be this opera company, and they toured the South. And today I love the theater. But I was born in the East Coast, where Don Messer and his Islanders and Hank Snow was the only two entertainers we knew. The Bible says the wise men come from the East, and I've been wise enough not to go to hell back. That's about the extent of my wisdom. But as the story goes, this opera company used to tour the Deep South, and all these little towns where they went into, a lot of black areas and that, and any areas of the play where it was a silent part, they'd hire locals in the town to fill in these spots where there was no talking. And they were doing the play Tosca. Now, I don't know who here has ever seen Tosca. But the finale of this play, when the fella comes out on the stage and he spins around about 3 times and shoves the sword through his lover, and she falls over dead. And his next lines was, oh my love, what have I done? Oh my love, what have I done? And some drunk in the back of the room jumped up and he said, I'll tell you what you done. You just killed the only whore in Tuscaloosa. So, you know, false pride has killed more drunks than bad liquor. Lots of times we don't know what the hell's going on, and we ain't going to let on that we feel that way. So this is a program that deals totally with what's going on, more so than what has gone on. And to tell you a little bit about me, I was born at a very young age. And I was not too familiar with a lot of happenings at that time. And I've taken the liberty of checking into it, nor was I drinking at that time. And John last night said so much that I identified with, and of course, Cherry really rang my bell this morning about childhood. Because after this deal last night, John really inspired Jeanette. She's been absolutely berserk ever since he talked. We went down to see Tommy, who I owe so much to, Tom B., from years ago. And after Tommy left, I was just dying to get in here and go dancing, and I swung to come down here, and Jeanette said, oh, no, you don't love her, boy. Get in here. And, that started it. But going back to the little town that I was born in New Brunswick, my real dad hung himself drunk in a granary. And my real mother was what that drunk in Tuscaloosa referred to. She owned a hotel in the little railroad town. And she supplied the men that stayed in that hotel with everything: food, lodging, and loving. And I was taken away from her when I was 9 months of age and turned over to the two people who raised me. Now, I never knew much about my parents, and when I was 11 years of age, I guess the Fenimore name got tossed around some tables. And what my real mother was, and some kids started teasing me. And I started fighting, physically fighting. And I didn't fight because I wanted to fight. I fought because of the fear of what you were going to say if I backed down. And this is what's killing more drunks than anything else, I find, within our own fellowship, is fear. And if you look at the letters in the word fear, it's false evidence appearing real. And there's nothing wrong with fighting if you can fight. I've never seen too many drunks that could fight. I get some of these guys, there's Newfoundlanders and Maritimers, come into my shop today, my office, and they got scars going in 17 directions, and they say, "Now he's a good fighter too, Lou." And I said, "You know, you've been looking at yourself through a telescope instead of a mirror. Good fighters have got no marks." They claim Sugar Ray Leonard is a hell of a scrapper, and he don't have a scratch on. And this is what this thing is all about, this program, is we become aware of what we're good at, and we become aware of what we're bad at. And you see, I was not a good fighter. It took a good man to beat me. It didn't take him long, but it took a good one. And I think of the story of the two boxers, a little Jewish boy, a little Italian boy. They got in the ring, and the referee called them to the center of the ring. And he gave them their instructions. And they went back to their neutral corner, and sitting down at the edge of the apron was a priest and a rabbi. And the rabbi never took his eyes off of this little Italian kid. And he seen him go back to the corner, and he seen him cross himself. And he poked this priest in the ribs, and he said, "What's that mean?" He said, "Not a goddamn thing if he can't fight." And I think this is what happens today, is we've tried to get through life like that, and all of a sudden, when we weren't looking, we got sucker punched. And I'd like to tell you right now, and I'm talking from experiences because I've done it. If you're coming into this fellowship to lie, steal, cheat, deceive, screw around, or whatever else, go to it. You're dealing with the best in the business. And I'd like to make one more observation. This weekend in this hotel, they had a convention of the class of 37, Royal Canadian Air Force. And they had a convention sponsored by Labatt's Breweries. And they had a convention of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'd like to make an observation right now. We are not second-class citizens. All my life, I was a second-class citizen. Wherever I went. And I was taken out of high school at the age of 15 and a half years of age and put in jail for 30 days in that little town in New Brunswick for drinking. And we got a lot of men that want to be macho and want to be tough, and I'm going to talk to you about being tough. I've never met too many tough drunks. When I got out of that jail in December, in April, I was 16 and a half years of age. My mom said something to me. And I hauled off and smashed her in the face in front of the sink, and down she went. And I grabbed my clothes and I ran, and I went to Halifax. I'll tell you how tough I really am. And I'm the only child. 2 years ago, last Father's Day, Mom phoned and asked me to come back home and see her. And when Jeanette and I went back to see her, she's 72 years old. That's how tough I am. I just cried in her lap for 5 days. See, 38 years had passed, and all the tramping that this tough guy had done, and all the years I missed my mom. And when Daddy died, she made sure he was buried 11 days before I was notified that he died 8 years ago. When I phoned her and told her that I was in Alcoholics Anonymous and had been sober 13 months, she said, "Thank God, Louis, my prayers have been answered because you was a wild little bastard back here." This is the example of faith of a mother. She never quit praying. And I think sometimes we can get so carried away with self-importance that we really forget what reality is all about. Everyone that ever comes near me paid dearly. I'll tell you that. There was no free rides in my car. No free rides in my car. I talk to Mom every week now. I love her and she loves me. I didn't have to go into a whole great bunch of details with Mom to explain to her what had happened. You see, society never did understand how we operated. They never did understand the way we lived. It's like the story of the psychiatrist. He was out at this mental hospital where he had a lot of drunk patients recovering. And about 10 o'clock in the morning, he walked out on his coffee break onto the grounds. And here was this bird with a wheelbarrow full of cement and some bricks, and he was building a wall. And he watched this guy for a while, and he had never seen work like this in his life. And he walked over to this man, and he said, "Pray tell me why you're in here." He said, "My parents resented me, so they had me committed." Well, he said, "I've never seen work like this in my life." He said, "We could use you in society." He said, that work you're doing is a piece of symmetrical beauty. He said, "I'm on the board of this institution." He said, "Come Thursday when this board meets," he said, "I'm going to stand and speak on your behalf." And he said, "I'll have you out of here on Friday." And he turned to walk away, and this jackass picked a brick up and threw it and hit him right in the back of the head, and down he went. And when he finally come unglued from this clout, he got up and he turned to this guy and he said, "Now, why did you do that?" He said, "I just didn't want you to forget Thursday." This is the way we've spent our whole life, getting the message through to society, and wondered why they reacted the way they reacted. You know, there's something in this book that's very interesting that Bill talked about. And that was the needs for confession of the wrongs done. The need for an inventory being done. The need for confession of people harmed. And the need for the belief and dependence upon a God of your understanding. This is in the very, very beginning of this book. I hear people say that there are no rules in Alcoholics Anonymous. Isn't that amazing? That in the 5th page of the doctor's opinion it says all we must do is follow a few simple set of rules. And it's spelt exactly that way. I hear people say today, as I interpret this program, where did you ever see anything printed at a general service office that says, "as you interpret this program"? I don't have a great deal of education, in fact, very little. So I had to get a dictionary. And if you look up the meaning of the word interpretation, it says avoidance of truth. And if you want a screwed up description of something, ask a drunk for his interpretation of it. That is why they printed this book precisely the way it's printed, is so that we would not have to interpret things. And I think another thing that I am finding today in the area with which I live, in our movement, and I cannot speak on behalf of Winnepeg, but I can speak of my own experiences, is that I see in the book it says resentment is our number one offender. Am I right? And then I hear the next person come along and say the only thing you need is 2 members of resentment, a big book, and a coffee pot to start a meeting with. And this really confuses me. In Vancouver or in BC today, I just checked statistics, 597 meetings in Alcoholics Anonymous, and 93 of them contributed to central office. Because we've got probably 480 meetings that have started on a resentment, 2 members and a big book, and that's still all there is in the meeting, is 2 members, a resentment, and a big book, and they can't pay the rent, let alone send money to central office. So maybe when we get down to looking at what it says, we find out that this is a program that is built on what was talked about all weekend here, when John walked up before the meeting and said, "I love you." I wonder sometimes if we ever realize the significance of those 2 words. Love in the dictionary says genuine concern for your fellow human being under all conditions. Do you know what you're saying when you say, "I love somebody"? That's not a conditional thing. That's not the thing you was raised under as a boy. Clean up your room and I'll give you a quarter. Be a good boy and you can go to a movie. That's a conditional thing. This is an unconditional thing. I've sung in most of the better skid roads across Canada, and I've been in all the decent jails, and I've lectured in every beer parlor on every given subject known, except what I worked at. And when I went to Vancouver, I went to the place that I was most comfortable, was the Sally Ann Mission. And I sung every night for 2 glazed donuts, and if I accepted Christ as my personal Savior, they'd throw in another one, and if I was hungry, I did, and if I didn't, I didn't, and that's the way it was. And when I come to Alcoholics Anonymous, it was the same thing. Every meeting I went to, they had a plate of them goddamn glazed donuts. I ate enough glazed donuts that I'll tell you, I could, with no handkerchiefs, I could lick the inside of my pocket and tell you which meeting I was to last. But I don't care too much to talk about all my drinking. I hear people talk about all the troubles they had and what they drank. I have yet to have my first drink of Scotch whiskey. I think that's the worst trash they ever bottled. But I've drank gallons of rubbing alcohol. That was my drink. I loved it. It was like that good old premium. I could get 2 provinces per quart. And I think sometimes we get into this competitive storytelling business, and that's what got me in all my trouble when I came to AA, was that very thing. Was that very thing. And I met a lady in the city of Vancouver who many people here know. Julie May knows her well, Winnie, just a sweetheart. Tommy knows her. And she had 4 children. And I was introduced to her by a friend, and she was on welfare. And she had a bunch of old furniture that had been given to her by St. Vincent de Paul. It wasn't much, but there was a little bit in every room. And I got working at Johnson Terminals, and I surveyed the situation, and I thought, if I'm going to live with this family, they've got to have better stuff than that. And I traded her all in, and this woman had never, ever before been introduced to bailiffs, or sheriffs, as you call them, but she sure as hell got to know them after she met me. We never kept anything very long, and they repossessed it. And I'd get it all in new again, they'd repossess again. They used to repossess those electric ranges before we even got the paper sticker, the seal off of the door. And I went on a drunk, which I hope was the drunk of all drunks. And I think that it's the one that has meant so much to me, because on November the 16th, I got thrown out of the Rainier Hotel at Carroll and Cordova on the Skid Row to Vancouver for what I pray was my last drunk. And on the Sunday morning, I said to Winnie, I said, "What's the number of Alcoholics Anonymous?" She said, "If you want the goddamn number, look it up." And that's the most she'd said in weeks. I was thinking she was thinking maybe we'd get back together again with that type of language. And I've never seen it, Al-Anon or not, you can talk what you want, that was that compassionate with a drunk. They have a quality of torture, these wives, that is undescribable. I remember old Joe one time, he said, Al-Anon in spiritual terms are sisters of perpetual torture. But anyway, I think of the story of a fella out in Vancouver. He passed away, 36 years sober. He was in a beer parlor in Courtenay, drunk. He hadn't been home for about 5-6 days. The guy was sitting beside him. He said, about a year ago I went to this outfit, and he said, they never helped me, but he said, they might be able to do something for you. So he took old Ross, he took him to a meeting. And he never drank again, Ross didn't. But he went home after that meeting, and he walked in, and there was dead silence. And you'd have had to know his wife, Maud. And he said, I took this as long as I could. And he said, finally I looked at her and I said, "Sweetheart, I found a group of people downtown who are happy and sober." And she said, "Well, stay away from them, you son of a bitch, or they won't be happy and sober very goddamn long." And we don't like that, but that's the type of understanding we required at that given time. But I looked up the number and I phoned Alcoholics Anonymous, and in those days Lucy answered the phone, and her sister Virginia used to be on the phones in Edmonton. And Lucy said, the thing I like about it was that it was an unconditional help that was given to me. They never asked me a whole lot of questions. How many kids you got? Are you black? You white? Do you believe? Do you don't believe? Do you belong to a church? Are you a member of any organization? Who do you work for? She just said, "Where do you live?" And I told her. She said, "I'll have 2 men come to see you." And 2 men came to see me. But, I went to take a drink out of the fridge that morning before I ever phoned AA. I had a half a bottle of wine. And a voice as clear as anything could be said, "Lou, your drinking days are all over." And the minute I put the phone down, I took my liquor to the guy next door and I gave it to him. Until this very moment, never once has liquor ever gone through my mind. Never. But something that I think is important, these 2 fellas come to see me. Now I'll tell you the condition I was in. Our lights were shut off. Our phone was disconnected. Every stick of furniture we owned had been repossessed except the mattresses. And the law in Canada in those days was they could not take the mattresses out from under the kids. They had to leave the mattresses. Winnie at those days was cooking on a 2-burner camp stove for whatever she had to feed the kids. I owed $7,300 at 51 different places. I dealt with a lot of people. I see people that deal like in the same goddamn store their whole life. They never get to know nobody. And it took me 3 hours to tell these 2 guys that come to see me what I had to say. When you're in that situation, you shouldn't have a hell of a lot to say. What does it say in the book about working with the new guy? It says, say what you got to say, then let him steer the conversation in any direction he wants. You see, I was just the opposite. I steered it that way before they said anything. in a number of things that are important. When they were leaving about 3:30, 4 o'clock, they said, we'll be back to get you tonight to take you to a meeting. And when they left, I ran right across the street to the guy I was drunk with the day before. And I ran up his back stairs, across his patio, into his kitchen. And he had a glass of whiskey, and he went to take a drink. I said, put that down, I'll kill you. He said, what the hell happened to you? I said, I quit drinking. And he said, when? I mean, really, this man was surprised. And he's a business agent for the Electrical Workers Union. I mean, he wasn't no high-class banker. He was a worker. And I said, oh, must be 6-8 hours now. I laugh about it today, but you know, he's never uttered a bloody word to me from that day to this. He thought whatever in the hell got a hold of him is not coming in this house. Now, we laugh about it, but let's get down to the book. In the book, what's it say here? It says, but the ex-problem drinker who has found this solution, who is properly armed with facts about himself, not AA. Nowhere do they ask me to carry the message of my recovery. That's all I know, is what God and you people have given me. If I'd have known the message of AA, they'd have asked me to write this book. And I have done that, and I don't like the copy that I wrote. If he is properly armed with facts about himself, can generally win the entire confidence of another alcoholic in a few hours. Until such an understanding is reached, little or nothing can be accomplished. And so this is why, as I say, when I came to this fellowship 24 years ago, they told me that there was 500,000 members in 92 countries in the world. Today they tell me 24 years later there's 1,400,000 in 115 countries in the world. Hell, the Jehovah's Witnesses would round up that many in a long weekend. They really got going. So we got a long way to go in carrying this message of love. And I think that this is where the wisdom of the whole program come in, and I never seen it, was when they said we share our experiences, strength, and hope with each other. And there's a lot of difference between sharing experiences than imposing opinions. A great deal of difference. And you see, they took me to my first meeting, and I think that's why it is so important to be honest with the new guy. I went to my first meeting that night, as I said, owing all this money, lights shut off, unemployed, on welfare, and I had a black shoe on and a brown one. Now, you still can't get shoes like that today. I have a pair of black ones, brown ones on now, and I have a pair of black ones, and I have a pair of white ones. I've got shoes of all colors, but you can't get a black and a brown one. They don't make them. And there was a fellow at the front door, and he said, welcome, you're in the right place. And I thought, now he has spotted something that nobody else has detected. And I couldn't wait to get home and tell Winnie what this guy had said. And she said, go look in the mirror. It's the most obvious bloody thing anybody could have come up with, that you're in the right place. But I'll tell you what happened at that very first meeting. Maybe none of you people have experienced this. But I walked into my first meeting and I sat down and I swore they gave every bloody speaker about $30 worth of change. They're all dressed up. And the members that were sober many years in their days were the only people I ever seen that could lean right over backwards and touch their head on the floor and their feet and never leave the floor. And they'd spring back up and they'd say, material things don't mean nothing. You know, no teeth. And I was thinking, no goddamn wonder they don't mean nothing to you. And I'd watch them. I kept my eye on these birds. And they'd leave in Lincolns, and they'd leave in Cadillacs, and nice clothes. And I thought, I missed something in their bloody talk. And you know, it's amazing how the things change. I can tell you today, material things mean absolutely nothing to me because I have them. But there's something that's printed in this book that maybe a lot of people have never noticed. It's the 8 basic human problems of the alcoholic. It says we were having trouble with personal relationships. I wrote that line. I just put it in there. It says we couldn't control our emotions. We were a prey to misery and depression. We couldn't make a living. We had a feeling of uselessness. We were full of fear. We were unhappy. And we couldn't seem to be of real use to other people. This is in the book. You don't need to ask people what's wrong with you. Read this book, it'll tell you. There's only 164 pages. There's not a lot of big words in it. It's printed in large letters. I read this book every day of the year, 365 days a year. I never miss a day I don't read my book. 3 pages, 10 times over is what I was told. Not much of a plot to it. It's not like the Carpetbaggers or Brigadoon or something. But a lot of vital information is in here if we can read it. The second meeting I went to, the third meeting I went to up on 4th Avenue, you know, this pointing fingers, a guy said, "Hey there, you, would you like to speak?" And I spoke for 20 minutes, telling the new people what I thought they should do to stay sober. And a fellow who just phoned me a few weeks ago and asked me to speak at another roundup got up right behind me and he said, "Remember something, Lou, you called us, we didn't call you." And I had some people in this fellowship who were older members who were very honest with me. Because after 6 weeks sober, I borrowed $200 and started a trucking business. And there's people here that can bust a gut laughing about this. Here's a guy, if brains was made elastic, I wouldn't have enough to make a jockstrap or a mosquito, and I'm in business. I got a $200 truck to make a living with, and 8 weeks later, I got a white Cadillac to chase women with. Because I didn't take inventory, I took stock. Well, maybe a couple of other people here has done that. Anyway, that's beside the point. It says if you want what we got and are willing to go to any lengths to get it, and I looked around at some of the guys' wives, and I looked at their cars and their jobs and their jewelry, and I wanted all of that, and I just run them concurrent. I changed them around weekly. And this trucking business was the joke of Vancouver. Honest to God Almighty. $200 for a truck that burnt 5 gallons of re-refined oil a day. And I started out picking up garbage. And there's quite a story to it. I was in small debts court 41 times my first 2 years sober over bills. And I used to talk about all the money I owed. And old Gordy Jans, who's passed on today, he got up at a meeting one night and he said, "You know, Lou, you've been talking about all that money you owed. You ever considered paying it?" And I thought, now that's a different approach. I really hadn't got that serious about it. But it says in here the exact nature. It says you are about to taste the first accurate self-appraisal. And do you know, only for a group like us would they put the word accurate in? In these 12 steps, there's 3 of these that I find that are written totally the opposite for us that they would be for any, maybe other person in any walk of life. To minister your church, they'd probably say to him, admit to God and another human being the nature of your wrongs. And he would, but for us they had to say exact. And for him, they'd probably say, make a list of the people you've harmed and become willing to make amends to them. And he would, but for us, they had to say all. And for him, they'd probably say, continue to take an inventory, and when you're wrong, admit it. And he would, but for us, they had to say promptly. Yeah. This program was designed by drunks for drunks. I hear people say, this program's good for everybody. I suppose it is. But it was designed for us, and we better keep it that way or we'll lose it. I see today they got AA and GA and EA and PA and ACOA, and the biggest thing today, you better know your goddamned alphabet when you come here, you won't know where to go. It says that Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other, unquote. There ain't no way you can change that. That they may solve their common problems and help others to recover from alcoholism. I've got a lot of obsessions. And if you look up the meaning of the word obsession, it says you are obsessed with an idea excluding all other ideas. Money became an obsession. Work is my number one obsession today. I'm a workaholic. Women was an obsession. I don't know why, because I was like a bloody dog chasing a car. When I caught her, I didn't know what the hell to do with her. Like I say to Jeanette now, I said, I'm a lot like a rabbit. This won't take long, did it? It's true. Don't laugh about it. I'm the one that has to live with it. What the hell is the matter with you? But I had enough people come into my life who made me see conditions as they really are. You see, when I was a young man and people come along and said, you know, Lou, you're phony, I was ready to fight. I thought that was bad. And it isn't. Look it up. It says phoniness is refusing to see conditions as they really are. That doesn't mean it's bad. I just don't see them the way they are. Old Bert Bingham sat right in my front room with 16 people sitting there, including my wife. And he said, you know, Lou, you're the phoniest bastard I ever seen in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I was all ready to belt him. And you see, he made that statement as the result of an assessment he had done, and he was quite accurate. He was sharing experiences. And one of the things about putting it that way, I didn't have to turn to Tommy and say, well, now, what does he mean by that? When you're talking to a drunk, don't try and impress him how bloody well educated you are. Talk in a language that he understands, if you love him. You see, I think sometimes that I get so carried away that Tommy mentioned today, I can rise above these people. And you know, you forget them. And I don't ever want to be an old-timer that they talk about. I'd like to be a long-timer. And I think of the story and think about it when you leave this convention this weekend. I think of the story of the couple who had a farm. They raised wheat and grain and produce and all that. And one night in the fall, it was cool. The frost had set in, and they walked out in the fields to look over their farm, and they had their little boy with them. And he wandered off, as kids do. And they hollered and yelled and screamed, and they couldn't find him. And so they ran back home, and they phoned the reserve army and told them what had happened, and they said, we'll send an officer and a troop of men out in the morning, and we'll look for your son. And in the morning they did. And the officer took this group of men up to the edge of this field, and he said, now I want you to hold hands and walk through this field. And they did. And they found this little boy, and he was dead. He had perished. And his daddy reached down and picked him up, and he held him in his arms. And he looked at his wife, and he said, you see, if we'd have held hands last night, we wouldn't have lost him. This is what happens today. We quit holding hands. We got well before we get better. And thank God, I still require you to hold my hand today. I always admired people who grew up in life. I just got older. I think it's a fabulous thing to grow up. We have those three stages in Alcoholics Anonymous. We sober up, we smarten up, we grow up. Smartening up is a tough thing. Growing up is very difficult. And yet in my third year in Alcoholics Anonymous, I ran into a fellow from Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, Cease, who was speaking. And after he's done, I said, and I had these big tears in my eyes, and I said, I'd love to talk to you. And he was invited as the guest speaker. And he took 3 hours out of the day just for me. And what I'm trying to say is the only thing we've got on our side is time. And yet we don't have any of it. I'm too busy. Can you call me later? He might not call later. He took 3 hours out of his time and told me about the 12 steps of this fellowship. And I started one of the step meetings like they have in Prince Albert in Vancouver. And it's different than any other meetings in that city, inasmuch as it's the first meeting in that city that was ever closed with the Lord's Prayer, and that bloody near ended Alcoholics Anonymous in Vancouver. We had people who came there, and the minute we started to say it, they'd get up and start a conversation just to try and break it up. And we got a lot of meetings that close with the Lord's Prayer now. I have never missed a step meeting except when I'm out of town or on holidays, and we just started a new series for 18 weeks, which I chair. And I'm starting through them now for the 57th time, which goes back 21 steady years. I've never missed a step meeting. See, the fact that I don't have a lot of knowledge and I'm not an intellectual, because an intellectual is a person who's educated beyond his capacity to understand. All it says is here are the steps we took, and I've never been told how long you took them. I just keep going over and over and over. And I find today that once I get my arrogance under control, my ego flares up. If I get that under control, something else follows. Jealousy, envy, greed are three biggest killers, it tells us. Now, you people I know have never done the things that I've done in AA. I'm past my drink. You have never pointed to a guy across the room and say, oh, that phony son of a bitch, I'll tell you. You've never done that, I know. And don't go to that, like they said, don't go to that goddamn group over there for this and that. Why? Why are you jealous of this person? Has he been successful? Are you envious of this lady because she's popular? I have a fellow that I sponsor. He phoned me just a few weeks back. He said, you know, Lou, he said, I'm coming up to my 11th birthday in November. And he said, I never get any phone calls. I said, they can't all be wrong. If you're 11 years in this fellowship and you give your numbers out and you ain't getting no calls back, I'd suggest you look at something. Don't try to justify and say, well, maybe I gave them the wrong number. No, you gave them the right one. This fellowship is based on attraction rather than promotion. And I was not a very attractive individual for the first 10, 11 years in this fellowship. I was sober. And that's why sobriety is, to me, is just the beginning of this fellowship. I realize today that you could get a guy come out in front of this hotel out here and urinate out there. And the first guy come along and say, well, what do you expect? He's an alcoholic. And the second one would say, well, at least he's sober. John talked about that the other day when we were together. No. I remember something that Chuck C. told me many, many years ago. Back 1970 in Shreveport, Louisiana at the Tri-State Convention. He said, when you walk out of your home every morning, you're representing the largest company in the world. Do a good job. And I don't really believe until that time I really realized that I had that type of a responsibility. I looked upon myself as a drunk that came off of the Skid Row. Skid Row is not people, it's a place. We have people in Vancouver from all walks of life down there, millionaires. It's a place, it isn't people. And I began to see these steps as they was printed. And I started to look at them as they're printed. And in this book, in the Vision for You, people saying, I've read this book above and beyond, over and below, the Sermon on the Mount, and Think and Grow Rich, and the 1 Minute Manager, and I mean, go on and on. I got a library full of them. And in the Vision for You, it says, though you be but one man with this book in your hand, we believe it contains all the answers you will need. And it says, cling to the thought that in God's hands your dark past is your greatest possession. You see, I think a lot of people feel that because they have faith and that they believe that they're both the same thing. And I found that they're totally the opposite. I look at the cable car that goes up and down Gross Mountain in Vancouver, and I believe that the cable that thing rides on is very strong. But I don't have enough faith to get in that bucket. Okay. They're two totally different things. They are two totally different things. And you know, when I was sober 4 years, they found their way clear to give me 3 new trucks. And they have a very unique thing in Canada, and I'm in business world today, so I have them. They have what they call a conditional sales agreement. Now, with this one trucking business, I had one truck, and I was so busy looking for the first one, they repossessed the second one. Or I was so busy looking for the second one, they repossessed the first one. About 6 months later, they repossessed the Cadillac, and I'm sober. And I got an ad in the Yellow Pages, and the phone was disconnected, and, I'm busier than a one-armed paper hanger with the crabs going to AA meetings, running around. And all of a sudden, I realized something, and that on this conditional sales agreement, which they talk of us being out of touch with reality, it said, now, Mr. Finnemore, you give us $244.81 a month, and you keep this car, and you don't, and we take it back. And it was just my luck to deal with a guy who kept his end of the deal. He took it back. And I ran all through AA saying, whatever you do, don't deal with that bloody Avco Delta. And I find they're fine business people. They have high interest rates, but they're fine business people. See, we're not used to dealing with people who keep their end of the deal. We speak in a fine spray of generalities, but nothing concrete that you can put your finger on. And I have found all through life that anything that I didn't do maintenance on, I lost. Whether it's home, relationship, business, AA, or whatever. You lose it. After 13 years, a fellow who I had something to do with came along to me and he said, Lou, he said, I don't know how I could ever repay what you've done for me and my family, but he said, how would you like to manage my main jewelry store? And he had 4 of the largest custom designed jewelry stores in Vancouver. He's a Danish fella. And I said, I'd love to. Ego answered it. I sold a trucking business, went into the store. I didn't know an emerald was green or a ruby was red. The first morning on the job, a lady come in. She dumped some gemstones out in the pad and said, what can you do with these? And I felt like saying, puke. I thought, once again, boy, I'm in a spot I shouldn't be in. And I'll tell you, that night when I went home, Ragnar said to me, he said, I want you to sit down and list every possible reason as to why a lady or a man would not want to buy a piece of jewelry in this store. And what he was telling me nicely was handling objections. And this is what this program is all about, is handling objections, learning to live in life. I never have an AA sticker on my card. It's not because I'm against them. It's because I haven't totally learned how to handle objections. None of you people don't go down the street, and some guy in front of you is driving 20 miles an hour, and you go by and give it the finger. Where'd you get your bloody license, Eatons, you stupid? And when you drive by, it says, live and let live. Easy does it, one day at a time. And he's thinking, who the hell is that? Until I can practice these principles in all my affairs, I don't put no stickers on nothing. I don't put no stickers on nothing. And I started to look at these steps as they're printed. And in our step meeting, we have a first step inventory. And it is far more in-depth than 4 and 5 or anything else. When you look at how many times you've moved, how many schools you've attended, how many deaths was in your family and how did they affect you, how many relationships you have, who left, you or her, how many jobs have you had, why did you leave, when did you leave, how long did you work on each one. We talk about an unmanageable life. And if we look at the step as it's printed, it says that my life had become unmanageable. It doesn't say you was born with one and you're going to die with one. It says as the result of the excessive use of alcohol, my life had become unmanageable. And I think that this is so important is that I see this as it's laid out. I think it's so important that I see the one word in the second step, the word restore. Because two of my great loves in life today is that I'm a collector of records. I have probably the 5th largest record collection in North America, and vintage cars. And I looked up the meaning of the word restore, and it says to return to original form. It doesn't say you was born with negative thinking, nor do you have to die with it. You can be returned to original form. We came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to positive thinking. I look at this third step where it says we made a decision. I know just before I come up here today, I had to go to the bathroom and I turned it over to God, and He has made the wrong decision. But it says we made a decision to turn our will and our life over to the care of God. We don't turn nothing over to God. I see people, I turned a lot of things over to Him, He turned them right over to a bailiff and they'd repossess them. I see people turning everything over to God. They get up every morning and turn it over to God. I find there's a lot of things you just can't depend on Him at all. Not at all. It says, I turn my will and my life, which is my thinking and my actions. I've looked it up. That's all I turn over to God, is my thinking and my actions. I see people today say, well, I got to fly here, or I got to do this. I'm going to pray to God He'll look after me. Did He tell you to do it? Did He instruct you to go there? You see, we instruct God most times. We don't ask for help, nor do we pray. We give instructions. Please protect me, I'm going here. And I find today that you can talk about any portion of a man's anatomy. He'll even brag about some of them, but don't discuss his head. It's out of bounds. And my thinking and my actions is what gets me in all my trouble. And these are the things today that I must turn over to God. And you see, we come into this fellowship and we really and truly believe that we can tell people anything at all and they believe us. Many people are just kind. They just don't say nothing. When I look at what I done my first years in AA, I come in here and I told some of the goddamnedest lies you ever heard just to be accepted, to create a story. I told about being over in Korea, over in the Army. Hell, I couldn't even get in the Salvation Army. I said my dad was 6'9", 312 pounds. He was a big man, but he wasn't quite that big. I never could tell anything exactly as it was. I just had to make it a little bit dramatic. And you know, I've found through the result of these steps that it's okay for me to be just the way I am, to have done just what I've done. No more, no less. Accurate self-inventory. I don't have to be in any more towns than I've been in and any more cities that I've been in. But do you know, it's amazing that with no qualifications whatsoever, every dream I've ever had as a little boy has been fulfilled in 24 years in this fellowship. Every place I've ever wanted to go, I've been. Everybody I've ever wanted to meet, I've met. And I've had some of the greatest things happen to me. And these are the things I like to share. Because, you know, I think sometimes a new person, they look back at somebody who's been sober a while and they say, it's okay for you to talk, you don't know how I feel. I'd like to tell you right now, I belong to a group in Vancouver, and I was so pleased when I heard this ladies' meeting yesterday morning. By God, I take my hat off of that one. At our meeting, neither. We never discussed drinking. In the book it says, we were the makers of our own problems. Bottles were only symbols. I lied, I cheated, I stole and everything before I ever had a drink. We don't discuss drinking, we talk about feelings. Jealousy, envy, greed, fears, frustrations, emotions, anxieties, self-centeredness, rationalization, procrastination. Our whole meeting is conducted on that. We have that format and we state that at the beginning of our meeting. And it's worked out really well. It's amazing that you can hold a meeting for an hour. And I'm not saying people don't identify that they're an alcoholic, but we don't talk for an hour on who peed the bed the most or smashed up the most cars, because it really doesn't matter. I remember one time old Joe from Texas, he said, I hear these competitive storytellers. And he said, hell, I can win that goddamn one hands down. He said, one time Mary and I moved into an area in Sacramento and I got run over next day by the welcome wagon. You know, and I think sometimes maybe this is what happens, is that we get into this competition and it doesn't work. People have loved me well. I got 6 kiddies today that call me Dad. I got 9 grandchildren that call me Grandpa. Another one on the way. I got a little boy. Hans was talking about him earlier. When he was 2 years of age, he got into a can of Drano and ate it. We were at the BC Yukon Convention, Winnie and I, and a fellow from Australia who was staying at our home, and you talk about a power greater than yourself. I'll share some experiences with you now. He happened to go home to change his clothes because he'd been sweating all day at the hotel, and he got deported from Canada a month later for making a false statement on the declaration. He went home and found Darrell. And this little boy spent the next 7 months in the hospital. We've had a whole new face skin grafted on him, eyelids, lips. And it's pretty hard to notice that today, other than one eye don't close all the way. But his eyesight is good. He gave me a baby boy, a grandson, in February. But you know, when he came back from California, I phoned this plastic surgeon that done the work on his face, Dr. Cordimash. We were on welfare when it happened. We had nothing. They had 7 specialists work on him for 7 months. Eye specialist, ear, nose, and throat, plastic surgeon. When it was all done, we got a bill for $125. We don't remember them things, do we? When he came back from California, I phoned the doctor and I mentioned that Darrell would like to come up and see him. And he said, I remember that boy. He said, I still have the pictures of his face. I took him up to this doctor's office, and they met in a foyer of a big medical building. And they threw their arms around each other, and I looked at this surgeon, and the tears just flowing down his face. And he said, you know, you don't hear too much about the good jobs. You just hear about the bad ones. And do you know, isn't it amazing? Sometimes in our fellowship, you can do 100 things that's right, and nothing will be said but make one mistake, and it'll be front-page headlines, and yet we love each and every one of us. Do we? I'm so grateful for so many things. I'm so grateful that my oldest daughter, she wouldn't eat at the same meal table I sat at my first 6 months sober. I was not a pleasant person to be around. When I left that jewelry business, I got a job selling Electrolux vacuum cleaners to learn a little bit more about handling objections. And I would like to tell you right now, it's the best there is. And I will never forget the morning in Deep Cove. I rang a lady's doorbell, and she opened that door, and I gave her my card, and I said, good morning, I'm Mr. Fenimore. I'm your Electrolux representative for this area now. She slammed that goddamn door, and I thought the side fell right out of the house. What possessed me to do it, I have no idea. I wouldn't blame it on God. But I ran around the back of the house, and I rang another doorbell, and she come there and said, God, I hope you're not as unhappy as the lady that was just at the front door. And she called me inside, and we sit down and had a coffee, and we communicated. And do you know one thing I have found out? That there's a whole lot of difference between talking and communicating. I think sometimes we like to talk to someone for 4 hours, because that's 4 hours we don't have to do anything about our difficulties. And then we walk right out and find someone else to talk for 4 hours. And then we can run around and say, well, John told me to do this, and Tommy G told me to do that. No, they didn't. I've never seen too many people tell us. They share experiences, and we interpret them that they told me what to do. We have a lot of spot readers in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I hear people say there's 12 promises on page 83. And actually there is, but prior to that it says if we are painstaking about this phase of our progress, we will be amazed before we were halfway through. If not, we won't. But actually in this big book, or the one I have, now maybe, I don't know, maybe there's no more like it around, but this one I have has 49 promises in it. I'm going to read you 8 more. It says, there you will find release from care, boredom, and worry. Your imagination will be fired. Life will mean something at last. The most satisfactory years of your existence lie ahead. You will be bound to them with new and wonderful ties. You will escape disaster together, and you will commence shoulder to shoulder your common journey. Then you will know what it means to give of yourself that others may survive and rediscover life. And you will learn the full meaning of love thy neighbor as thyself. And that's 8 more of the 49 that's in there. There's 12 threats in this book, too. There's 5 exclamation marks in this book. And if you look up in the English language, anytime an exclamation mark is used, it says it's an order. What an order, I can't go through with it. There's a lot of things in this book that's printed, and they say it's suggestions, but man, are they strong suggestions. AA has been so good to me. 2.5 years ago, or 3 years ago, I got a phone call, and I was asked if I'd like to speak at a convention in the Republic of South Africa, at their national convention in Pretoria. And I'm thinking, here's a little boy that 25 years ago was a leading tenor in the Beulah Mission on the Skid Row to Vancouver. And all of a sudden he gets on an airplane. Jeanette couldn't go. She didn't have her holidays at that time. I'm in the city of London. I've never been in a city like that before in my life. I don't know nobody. On to South Africa. And I think what I'm trying to share with you is that AA is a travel agency that has got a ticket waiting for you for any country in the world. I've done a lot of traveling to all 4 corners, and I've never walked through the doors of a travel agency in my life up to this time. I've never been in one. I don't need to. I don't need anyone to tell me where to go. They told me that before I came here. Before I come to this fellowship, I had been subjected to every 2-word cliche in the book. Shut up, drop dead, get lost, take off, go home. And when I went to my first meeting, they said a new one that I had never heard before, and I'll be eternally grateful for it. Some guy said, come back. If you walked into this meeting today with the feeling that I had at my first meeting, that you was unwanted, unloved, hated, and despised, and sometime during this weekend, you received that little glimmer of hope that you're wanted, that you're needed, and that you belong, hang on to it. It may only come once. And if you think that Alcoholics Anonymous is the same all over the world, you're wrong. The program is the same all over the world, but if you think that AA is the same, you go to Africa, where black is black and white is white. And it's not because all the people want it that way. This is law. I had the privilege of living in Soweto for 2.5 days. Probably one of the greatest feelings I've ever had in my life, that I could stand and hug and kiss a black man in a country where it says you don't do it. If you could see the work that is to be done there, if you could see the way they treated me and Jeanette, the gifts that the colored people gave her, if you could see the letters I've received out of Soweto since I come back, something like 181. And the good Lord willing, we'll know in 2 weeks. I think Tommy's going to go next year as their speaker. I'm just going to get a hold of Bill Manning, and I think Tommy will go down and he'll love it, and they'll love him. And I was able to travel for 2.5 months throughout Africa and speak at 26 places. And a whole lot of privileges that AA gives you. I want to tell you, it's pretty nice. When you can go into Zululand, and President Kennedy was refused admission there 5 years ago because Buthelezi will not allow any old statesman of any other country in there. Yet all of us can go in because his wife had 18 months sobriety 2 years ago, July. This is a whole lot more than a program to quit drinking. This is not a philosophy to learn how to quit drinking. If you read the book, it says this is a philosophy to learn how to live sober. A sober state of mind and body. I say I'm a recovered alcoholic. Old Joe the wino said to me, 15 years sober. He said, have you ever read that book? I said, yeah. What's it say? And I said, well, I don't know all of it. He said, read it until you do. It says, this is how 150,000 alcoholics have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. To show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered, not quit drinking, is the main purpose of this book. We hope these pages will prove so convincing that no further authentication will be necessary. And in the back of this book it says, I will be given peace of mind in exact proportion to the peace of mind I bring into the lives of other people. And we're all sitting there saying, they love me better. Why don't you love first? He's as scared of you as you are of him. I'm the luckiest guy in the world. You know, I have a bunch of cards I give out. I got 100 or so of them here. It says you don't have to tell how you live each day. You don't have to say if you work or you play. A tried true barometer serves in its place. However you live, it'll show in your face. The fault, the deceit that you bear in your heart will not say inside where it first got to start, for seen you in blood or a thin veil of lace. What you wear in your heart, you wear in your face. If your life is unselfish, if for others you live for not what you get, but how much you can give, if you live close to God and His infinite grace, you don't have to tell it. It'll show in your face. That's what life's all about. If there's any new people here, I'd like to tell you right now, there's nothing so bad that it cannot be worse. There's nothing that time cannot mend. And troubles, no matter how many you have, must surely come to an end. You have stumbled, well, so have I in my time. Don't think of the past and regret. And you're sorry, God knows, so leave it at that. Let the past be the past and forget. Don't despair, don't give up, but just be yourself, the self that is highest and best. And forgive all my faults, and I'll forgive yours, and we leave up to God all the rest. That's what Alcoholics Anonymous is all about. I'm scared to pray for anything today for fear of getting it. I think sometimes at these conventions, people come here thinking that, boy, a week of this, I'm good for a year. We are given a daily reprieve which is contingent upon our spiritual growth. The only thing that I do just for today is not drink. I think sometimes that borderline between humility and senility is very thin. We get to the point where we got everything on a daily basis. They will not sell you a house today on a daily basis. They want a month's rent in advance when you rent a place. Sooner or later we have to face reality. I don't make a car payment every morning. You go in and buy 2 dozen eggs. Who the hell eats 2 dozen eggs in a day if you're living one day at a time? We have to learn how society operates. This whole life is computerized. I got charge cards, phone bills, and that, and they send me a bill, and it's as neat as can be. I walk into Safeway. I pick up a whole bunch of groceries, and they'll say, well, Mr. Fenimore, give us $88.40. You take them home. You don't leave them here. Nothing complicated about that. They send me my phone bill. They say, send us my phone bill in particular. It's $300-400 a month. You keep talking. If you don't, we pull the plug. Now, you can't beat anything like that. I don't even have to keep track of it. It's a privilege for me to drive a car. My friend Al in the back corner, Al M. was talking about it. I'm probably one of the fastest drivers in Canada, and my record proves it. God, it's just that they don't make cars fast enough for me. And, they had a meeting one night in Vancouver, and the chairman said, the topic tonight is fear, and Cinnamore brought the speakers. But there's a lot of people in this city that has really touched me over the years. I was in this very hotel at your 25th anniversary. Tommy B. was the guest speaker that night. Dr. Pincock was alive then, who was a great friend of ours. Tom was here. Old Hap. These people become like dads to me, see, because I never knew a dad. I never was a friend. And so I come here today, and I'm speaking at another meeting tonight. And I owe you people so much. And I'm going to tell you a story about trying to get this all in one time. It's like the story of the preacher that went to this little western town. And he was sitting up behind the pulpit, and he looked down at the audience, and there was one cowboy sitting there. And he went down to him, and he said, well, hell, do you think we should hold a service? Well, he said, I don't know, Reverend. He said, I don't know a hell of a lot about preaching. I know quite a bit about cattle, and if I pulled up to a corral with a load of hay and there was a cow there, I'd feed it. So he got the message, and he gave this bird everything he had in scripture, verse, and song. And when he was done, he went down, and he said, what'd you think? Well, he said, Reverend, I don't know a hell of a lot about preaching, but I know quite a bit about cattle. He said, if I pulled up to a corral with a load of hay and there was a cow there, I wouldn't give it the whole load. And you know that I think that, when we look back on all the things that control our life and the thing that cause troubles for us, suspicion is one. And I'll tell you one more little joke, and then I'll sit down. Because I have a very full life today. I have a very rich life, a very rewarding life. I have somebody who loves me today, who cares for me today. I was here last May. Jeanette and I to see her dad, and he died 2 weeks ago here. I've been to 4 funerals in the last 13 days. A little 18-year-old girl I took to Alateen was killed. A guy I sponsor, his mom found him, a little Dutch boy. She found him hanging in his apartment a week ago last Monday. He committed suicide, 30 years old. I've done eulogy at his funeral. Memorial for Jeanette's dad. Yesterday, after morning, I was at the Winnepeg General Hospital, cancer clinic. Her dad, who just died 3 weeks ago, his brother's in there, and he has spent most of his life on Skid Row to Winnipeg. And I don't know if he'll last today or not. It's hard to say. I hope not. I pray that he goes quick. He's got throat cancer. They've removed his voice box. He's standing there so frustrated trying to say something to you, and he can't get it out, and he can hear what you say, and he's a drunk. And Jeanette's stepmother, who her dad married, was in a very bad space when we were here in May, and I told her just what I thought of her. She was very rude. And yet, day before yesterday, I was able to go to on Friday, to the psychiatric hospital in St. Boniface and put my arms around her and cry in her lap and say I was sorry, because she's in bad shape. We got a lot of work to do. We have a lot of amends to make. I have things to say every day, something that an unnecessary jibe that maybe can hurt somebody. So don't be suspicious of other people. Don't be envious and jealous of what they got. And I want to tell you a little story. It's about this husband and wife, and their one thing they really enjoyed every year was this Halloween masquerade. And she had this idea that he was messing around on her, but she couldn't prove it. So she let him go, and they usually rented these real fancy costumes. And he went and rented his, and she'd rented hers, and they hadn't seen each other's costumes. So he come home this night of the party, and he said, well, okay, let's get ready and go. She said, no, honey. She said, I really don't feel like going tonight. She said, I just feel rotten. I've been sick all day. But she said, I know how much this means to you. So anyway, he got in his costume, and he got all dressed up, and as he went out, she seen his costume and which one it was, what he looked like, and the way he went. And about 3 hours later, she put hers on, which he had never seen, and away she headed for this masquerade. And she walked in and kept looking through the crowd, and finally she spotted him. And she went over and made a little play for him, and by God, sure enough, they had a dance or two, and he said, would you like to have a drink? So they went out into the back seat of the car and had a drink or two, and all hell broke loose. Well, when it was all over, she got out of the car and slammed the door and got in her car and went home, and he come home later on that night and went to bed. Next morning, he got up and they were sitting at the table, and she said, well, how was your evening? He's fabulous. Had a hell of a time. She said, really? Yeah? You really enjoyed yourself? Yeah? He said, what'd you do? Well, he said, nothing. He said, I left here and headed to the masquerade. He said, one thing. He said, on the way, he said, you know, old Henry, the barber? He said, yeah. He said, I stopped there and him and I exchanged costumes. So I've enjoyed being here this weekend. You people have given me so much. I want to take this chance of thanking the committee for asking me to come. I was never asked to go anywhere before. I want to thank my friend for picking us up at the airport and his wife. And they took us to Alasius for a beautiful feed of Ukrainian food and Friday night. See, we know what that feels like, and we know how much it means to us. The average guy takes it for granted. I don't take nothing for granted today. Everything in life is a gift from me. One drink and I lose it all. I have approximately 40 people a day go through my business. I have a home instead of a house. I don't own a great deal today. I don't need to. Very rich and don't have a lot of money. I make an excellent living. I'm with a little gal who drives bus in the city of Vancouver, a bus driver. And I think back, you know, when you start throwing bouquets around 2 years ago at their national rodeo for the men that think they're the best at everything. And I'm talking about a big bus, not a little one. Out of 64 drivers on the safety run of 52 obstacles, she was the only one that come in with a perfect score, 50 out of 50. The only thing I've always said to a lady, I don't like to hear the word broad used. It just drives me crazy. I think the one thing that's important is to learn to walk with dignity, to have a justifiable pride, and to become a member of the community that you live in. I only pray that I can be the type of friend you've been to me. Thank you, and God bless you.